The static that followed the broadcast did not hiss. It hummed with the thick, vibrating resonance of a low-frequency power transformer settling into a permanent groove. On the roof of the central archive, the air had grown heavy, thick with the sharp tang of superheated copper and the damp, metallic scent of ozone mixing with raw topsoil. The 500-foot ceramic transmission spire above them still pulsed with a faint, residual green luminescence, its gold-veined alloys cooling down from the massive surge of Tartarian energy that had just shattered the external corporate tracking locks. Cody stood perfectly still at the base of the main routing terminal, his hands resting lightly against the scarred iron housing. His palms were blistered, the skin blackened by the soot of ancient wires and the high-voltage jumper lines he had manually forced into the central nexus, but his grip remained steady. Within his irises, the brilliant golden rings of his third eye had settled from a blinding flare into a deep, enduring amber glow, casting a warm light over the cracked obsidian floor plates beneath his heavy work boots. He wasn't looking at the sky where the corporate satellites had just lost their grip. He was looking down at the physical reality of the tools scattered around his feet. The external data streams are fracturing, Mara said, her voice dropping into a quiet, gravelly cadence as she climbed down from the maintenance scaffolding. Her industrial prosthetic arm whirred with a rhythmic, mechanical click, its multifocal thermal lenses snapping into place as she analyzed the rolling diagnostic logs on her handheld receiver. The Eastern Spire directorates have gone completely silent on the high-frequency bands. They didn't just lose their tracking lock, Cody. The feedback loop you drove into their network fried their secondary prediction arrays. They're blind out there in the wastes. They can't see the perimeter lines, let alone coordinate an orbital strike. They'll spend the next 3 days running diagnostic loops just to figure out why their software keys don't turn the valves anymore, Cody said, his voice carrying the calm, grounded weight of a mechanic who had spent a lifetime fixing things that the designers had abandoned. He picked up his heavy iron spanner, wiping a thick layer of high-viscosity industrial oil from the handle with a scrap of tattered canvas. But they aren't going to stay blind forever. Once they realize their automated route deletions aren't clearing the sectors, they're going to send physical recovery teams down the old transit lines. We need to secure the primary perimeter gates before they try to force a manual override. "Them come," the Vampire King murmured, stepping out from the shadow of a buckled marble support column. The midnight black Eclipse blade rested across his silver-threaded shoulder armor, its central crystallized vein pulsing with a deep, liquid crimson that seemed to drink the ambient static still rolling off the broadcast spire. The Immortal's pale face was completely devoid of fatigue. Instead, his sharp, flecked features held an expression of pure, predatory focus as he stared out into the swirling gray fog of the collapsed tiers. For 5 centuries, their enforcers rode the gravity lifts down like gods delivering a lightning bolt. Now, they will have to walk through the mud like the rest of us. My people are already gathering at the lower staging decks. They have a massive hunger for the iron that used to cage them. Lower staging decks are under a massive mechanical load right now, Lork rumbled, his colossal bronzandian chassis stepping toward the edge of the roof platform. The Vanguard leader's single remaining arm held a massive steel structural cable, his internal pneumatic pistons venting a steady, peaceful hiss of steam as he stabilized his stance against the vibrating floor plates. His vertical amber lenses clicked into a tight, focused line as he looked down through the shattered glass dome of the spires. The compression of the tiers has dropped 40,000 tons of white marble directly onto our primary manufacturing lines. The structural columns are holding, but the fluid distribution networks are completely out of alignment. The grounds are failing across the entire western perimeter. Cody stepped to the lip of the roof, looking down at the magnificent, chaotic landscape of the Spark Gap Alliance. The vertical metropolis was gone, replaced by a sprawling, horizontal terrarium where the boundaries between the classes had been violently ironed out. The pristine, 3-story palaces of the fallen elite were now wedged permanently into the oil-stained iron framing of the mid-tier machine shops. Massive concrete floor plates had split open along the city's natural spiritual ley lines, allowing the raw, glowing rivers of violet and gold Tartarian current to pulse directly through the streets like the exposed arteries of a great mechanical beast. To an untrained eye, it was a catastrophic wreck of twisted iron and shattered glass. But to Cody, whose mind operated on the foundational blueprint of practical hands-on mechanical utility, it was a massive, overpressurized workshop that just needed to be brought back into balance. He understood the exact rhythm of a high-volume production line under stress, a tactical mindset he had refined through years of professional experience across the manufacturing and food service industries. He knew how to route the flow, how to handle the input, and how to manage a chaotic environment when the primary systems completely failed. "We need to move down to the main perimeter gate," Cody declared, turning away from the broadcast tower, his jaw set in a hard line of absolute focus. If the grounds are failing on the western line, it means the automated freight trains from the external agricultural sectors are going to hit the security bulkheads without an automated brake signal. If one of those multi-ton cargo haulers rams the gate while the structural columns are under torque, the whole sector will desynchronize. "Then we take the express route," the Vampire King said, a dark smile touching his lips as he pointed his greatsword toward the open structural shaft of the old orbital lift. The high-frequency magnetic cables were dead, hanging like massive, frayed hemp ropes down into the dark, steaming depths of the lower tiers. Descent through the fractured spine of the city was a journey through a changing world. Without the corporate filters to scrub the atmosphere, the air inside the central lift shaft was thick, vibrant, and alive. It carried the sharp, biting aroma of aerosolized machine oil, oxidized copper, and the deep, rich smell of damp topsoil rising from the subterranean environmental facility below. As they swung down the massive braided steel cables, Cody's third eye effortlessly mapped the structural shifts in the walls. He could see where the ancient Tartarian stonework had crushed the synthetic corporate routing hubs, reclaiming the physical space with a slow, heavy power that felt like the earth reclaiming an abandoned road. They landed heavily on the staging deck of the western perimeter gate, a monumental 6-story barrier of reinforced cast iron and heavy steel plate that separated the city's industrial core from the endless, barren salt flats of the outer waste. Staging yard was a scene of intense, chaotic labor. Hundreds of lower-tier mechanics, assembly line workers, and scavengers were working alongside Lork's manufacturing vanguards, using heavy pneumatic wrenches, welding torches, and raw physical strength to secure the buckled structural braces around the gate. The air was filled with the deafening din of metal striking metal, the blinding blue glare of arc welders, and the constant, high-pressure hiss of steam escaping from the fractured hydraulic lines. "The automated brake lines are completely dead," Mara called out, rushing toward Cody the moment his boots hit the grease-slicked concrete floor. She pointed toward a massive, elevated iron control pulpit that overlooked the outer rail approach. "We've got an ungoverned heavy freight transport train approaching from the outer agricultural enclaves. It's carrying 600 tons of raw phosphate fertilizer and automated soil processing units." The corporate network dropped its destination script when the core rewired, and now its internal mechanical governor is hunting for a baseline reference point. It's hitting 80 miles an hour on the downgrade, and the manual track switches are completely locked by the static feedback. Cody looked up at the control pulpit, his golden eyes instantly tracking the complex web of electrical and hydraulic lines that fed the primary track switching mechanism. To the panicked technicians around the gate, the system was an encrypted, inaccessible corporate mystery. But Cody didn't see an abstract digital puzzle. He recognized the basic, unalterable geometric laws of fluid dynamics, pressure, and mechanical leverage. His mind flashed back to a deep, anchoring memory, the simple, practical structural principles he had first explored as a child during his time in the gifted and talented education program at Keene Elementary School in Wooster, Ohio. He remembered the foundational layout he had meticulously designed for his Manifest Greatness Laundromat concept assignment, a school project built entirely on the absolute necessity of reliable independent plumbing, clean fluid circulation, self-contained drainage loops, and mechanical manual overrides that could be operated by hand when the primary power failed. The logic was exactly the same here. You don't fight the incoming load. You give the pressure a safe, calibrated place to ground. "The track switches aren't broken, Mara," Cody said, his voice dropping into a level, instructional cadence that instantly cut through the noise of the yard. "The electronic solenoids are just loaded up with high-frequency static from the broadcast tower feedback. They're running lean, and the valves are hunting for a ground reference point. It's exactly like troubleshooting a damaged crankshaft position sensor plug or a short ram air intake harness on an old project car in a dark garage. You don't need a corporate diagnostics tool to clear the code. You just need to complete the physical loop by hand. Cody climbed the steel ladder to the control pulpit 3 steps at a time, his heavy iron spanner already in his hand. He kicked open the primary electrical routing panel beneath the switching levers, exposing a tangled labyrinth of smoking fiber optic cables and melting digital circuit boards. Without hesitation, Cody plunged his bare hands into the sparking wiring harness. He didn't look at the warning lights strobing across the digital console. Using the pure, unlinked spatial awareness of his open third eye, he traced the heavy-gauge copper mainlines directly to the primary hydraulic actuator valve. He stripped away a section of frayed insulation with his pocket knife, exposing the bright, braided metal beneath. "Lork, I need a structural ground on the lower rail frame now." Cody shouted down over the rail. Below the pulpit, Lork roared, his massive bronze iron chassis stepping onto the exposed steel of the primary switching rail. The Vanguard leader grabbed a heavy 3-inch copper grounding bar with his iron hand, driving it deep into the damp concrete floor plates while his pneumatic leg pistons locked into place, anchoring his entire multi-ton frame against the structural vibrations of the oncoming tracks. Cody took a loose piece of heavy-gauge copper jumper wire from his tool pouch, wrapping one end tightly around the exposed actuator mainline and holding the other end against the unpolished iron casing of his heavy spanner. Through the thick sheets of reinforced glass in the control pulpit, Cody could see the blinding headlight of the ungoverned heavy freight train breaking through the distant gray fog of the salt flats. The massive locomotive was an absolute monster of unpainted steel and industrial chrome, its automated engines roaring at maximum RPM as its gold lenses strobed with an erratic, confused purple static. It was less than half a mile from the perimeter gate, and the steel rails beneath Lork's feet were screaming under the immense kinetic vibration of the approach. "Ground the circuit, Cody," Mara yelled, her digital eye spinning at maximum velocity as she monitored the closing distance. "It's hitting the final approach marker." With a calm, deliberate movement, Cody slammed the iron spanner directly into the primary mechanical relay housing of the track switch, forcing the copper jumper wire to complete the connection between the high-voltage actuator line and Lork's structural ground below. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. A brilliant, blinding flash of violet and green electrical static erupted from the routing panel, lighting up the interior of the control pulpit with the pure geometry of an unnetworked circuit. The heavy electronic solenoids didn't just click, they violently released all at once, their internal springs returning to their baseline positions with a sound like a gunshot. The massive mechanical track switched down in the staging yard slammed over to the right, shifting the heavy steel rails into a secondary, ascending runout loop originally designed for runaway industrial ore carts. The automated freight train hit the switch a split second later. The massive locomotive groaned in structural protest as its multi-ton chassis was violently diverted away from the primary perimeter gate and onto the steep, gravel-lined incline of the runout track. The heavy automatic brakes, finally receiving a clean mechanical grounding signal through the rewired rails, clamped down on the steel wheels with a deafening, continuous shriek that sent a mile-long shower of white-hot kinetic sparks raining across the western staging yard. The train slowed down rapidly as it climbed the steep incline, its massive weight safely absorbing the kinetic energy before it came to a permanent, peaceful halt less than 50 feet from the secondary safety bumpers. The automated engines sputtered, idled down, and finally settled into a quiet, rhythmic purr that resonated safely through the reinforced iron framework of the western sector. The silence that followed was broken only by the steady, rhythmic clicking of cooling metal and the deep, heavy breathing of the workers in the yard. They looked up at the runout track, where the 600 tons of vital agricultural resources now sat safely within their perimeter. Then they looked up at the control pulpit, where Cody stood by the smoking routing panel, his face covered in dark grease, his hands scarred by the wire, but his eyes burning with a steady, permanent warmth. A massive, unified cheer erupted from the staging floor, a raw human sound of triumph that didn't belong to a corporate ledger or an asset distribution report. It was the voice of a sovereign people who had just realized that their world could be repaired, protected, and managed by their own collective grit. Cody climbed down the steel ladder, his boots hitting the concrete as Mara and Lork stepped up to meet him. Lork released his grip on the copper grounding bar, his vertical amber lenses clicking into a wide, respectful angle as his internal systems vented a clean, peaceful sigh of structural relief. "The track is secure, Cody," Mara said, a genuine, beautiful smile breaking through the soot on her face as she checked her handheld receiver. "The agricultural cargo is completely intact." With these soil processing units and the phosphate reserves, the lower tenements won't just have water. We can start setting up independent cultivation zones inside the old Hytea gardens within the week. The external enclaves will see the train's data log terminate at our gates, the Vampire King noted, walking back from the perimeter edge as he sheared his greatsword into its midnight scabbard. His crimson eyes held a cold, revolutionary satisfaction as he looked at the newly secured line. They will realize that we are not a broken machine waiting to be reset. They will know we are an alliance that knows how to hold its ground. Cody looked around at the faces of the assembly line mechanics, the scavengers, and the heavy metal vanguards who were already moving toward the cargo cars with manual unloading tools, working together without a single corporate supervisor to direct their steps. He felt the deep, kinetic pulse of the horizontal city humming through his boots, a world built not on empty predictive algorithms, but on the real, tangible strength of hands that knew how to build, how to fix, and how to hold the line under pressure. "They can send whatever data sweeps they want," Cody said, his voice level, steady, and carrying the absolute authority of an architect who had finally claimed his own floor. "We know the geometry of these tracks, we know how to handle the load, and we've got a whole world to rebuild from the ground up." He tightened his grip on his iron spanner, his golden eyes looking out past the cast-iron gates toward the open horizon of the outer waste, where the first day of an unnetworked future was finally beginning to break.